Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to you, wherever you may be. Welcome to Queering African History. This is an event hosted by Hub Cymru Africa and SSAP to mark LGBT History Month. I will be your host this evening and the chair of this panel discussion. My name is Faith Israel. My pronouns are she and they, as you can see. And yes, I will be leading this event. And so the event is actually going to be a webinar format. So that means only the panelists will be able to share their microphone and video. And so everybody else will be muted. But please feel free to use the chat function. Please feel free to put in there whatever you're feeling as the discussion is going on, whether it's a comment or a question. Please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A functions. We are really grateful to have you all again, those of you that have just joined. There will be a time at the end for questions. So please, again, do make a note of anything that strikes you, anything that maybe you're not sure of that you want to ask about. Please feel free to put that in the Q&A, and hopefully we will have enough time to go through all of the questions. There will also be a survey at the end of the session. Please fill this in. We really appreciate and value any feedback we can get. So please do help us put on even more events that will be of value to you. And just to say as well, any form of abusive or offensive language or behaviour in the chat boxes and throughout the session will not be tolerated. So if we can please all just listen with respect and just being mindful of each other's experiences. So we're just going to now get started. If our speakers would like to introduce themselves. If Z don't mind starting, and we can just move around.
Yes, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Z, pronouns they, she. Where to start? I'm very glad to be in this panel. My full-time job is I work for Stonewall UK, which is an LGBT organization in the UK. And besides that, I'm a writer, facilitator, and I talk about, LGBT Black history mainly, but also just LGBT and gender and sexuality as well. And yeah, that's pretty much me. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Z. Byd-eang, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Byd-eang Apata. I'm the founder of African Rainbow Family. And African Rainbow Family, it's a charity that campaigns for LGBTIQ people in the UK who are seeking asylum. We also provide other support to them whilst they are going through the journey of asylum. We have 5 centres in the UK: London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, and Cardiff. And my background, it's in law. And yeah, I think I'll keep it that way for now and then see how we go on.
Thank you, Byd-eang. And finally, Zethi.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zetu Matebeni. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you, Faith, for the invitation. I'm based in South Africa, and I'm the chair of the Queer Archive in South Africa, which is based in Johannesburg. It's called Gala, the Queer Archive. And I'm also a research chair at the University of Fort Hare, and the research chair is on sexualities, genders, and queer studies. And yeah, I'm a sociology professor.
Thank you, and thank you all of our speakers just for joining us for this event. I'm really excited. So we are going to go headfirst into the topic. And so one thing that I think a lot of us would like to begin to understand is, where does that myth, the myth that queerness is an African, come from? Where do you think that has stemmed from, and how have we gotten here? Dr. Sethi, I'm going to look to you to begin.
Oh, okay, sure. Sure, Faith. First, I think first I would like to make the distinction between homosexuality and queerness. So the former is legislated against, while the latter is still finding its own forms of expression through challenging regimes of the normal, the normative, etc. So unlike homosexuality, queerness is expansive, and it includes many forms of gender expressions and sexualities other than homosexuality. So what we know for sure is that it is homosexuality that is considered an African. So, and what I would say is to call that a myth is actually an understatement. In my view, it is a political vehicle that colonizers and those who refuse to decolonize their minds, to decolonize their ways of being, and even the states they govern, because most of what we know about homosexuality being labeled an African has come mostly from African leaders. So they use this to make Africans look uncivilized, look uncultured, and look ungodly. And yeah, so I'll just leave it here, but I do want to talk a little bit about what is the evidence that shows that colonizers have actually ensured that homosexuality remains or is considered an African.
Byd-eang, I don't know if either of you want to.
Yeah, I mean, of course, for me, in my journey of, like, of course, being born in the Netherlands, moving to London, and in my research of understanding who I was, because I grew up in a very heteronormative society, which mainly a lot of people have, unfortunately. The sort of the myth or the political, because I definitely believe in that as well. The political statement is not only within Africa, but also it was coming from sort of my parents going into sort of finding a new place in the Netherlands, living, trying to survive, and trying to raise kids as well. As in the mindset that started from that is very much very rooted in British. A lot comes from the British and Portuguese anthropologists who wrote a lot about African people, and often they used words to describe beastly. They said they were unhygienic. They used all these things to make them less human, and that's what a lot of what I found a lot in my research that I did by myself, just outside of university. And I think specifically, often what I've seen in the history is very much that it was related to African men. So I've mainly seen how they've described African men or talked about trans women or men who would dress in women's clothing and those things. But when it came to specifically masculine women, that was often not, or trans men, that was often not discussed at all, right? Because if we look at the history, it's very much related to the patriarchy, and that's what they're really focusing on as well. Where they were talking about men being sort of the head of the household. So why, if you are going to be a second person, meaning the woman, why would you ever dress less than what you are, right? So a lot of that was very much rooted into what Setu said about, sort of this political vehicle to get people to say, you know what, you are less than human, and why would you deem yourself and make it worse, right? So make it worse, i.e., going from the man of the household, the upper, to becoming a woman, and dismissing a lot of the spiritual and social and a lot of the spiritual elements of what trans women and trans men were. So yeah, that's a bit about my background of understanding that.
Okay, so just like following on from that, I guess another question that I have for you all is there a queer or homosexual African figure, historical figure specifically, or something that just inspires you, and maybe you wish that this is something more people should know about? If either of you have that, any of you have that?
I mean, I definitely do. I think it was part of my journey of understanding more about African history in general. You know, there's a difference between, you know, being born in the Netherlands and, you know, from a distance seeing what is happening in Africa, but never really feeling that I'm part of the history there. Now, my parents do have a direct link to the Cape Verdean Islands, but Cape Verdean Islands is colonized, you know, it was colonized by Portugal. So I, you know, there's still this longing there for me to really root what is African history, right? How can I find more of myself, right? My last name is Montero. That is also Portuguese. So what is going on there, right? So for me, coming from the outside, going in and trying to figure out and dive into it, I think the person that really, I mean, there are two people. One is situated in, or was a person that I just recently, a couple of months ago, heard of. Their name is Polly Murray. They are American, but they were non-binary. And the reason why, so they were Polly Murray, lawyer, civil rights activist turned priest, which I really loved reading about, you know, and dealt with multiple erasures on the contribution that they made. And, you know, at that time, so they were talking about like 1970, 60, they actually wrote down, and I need to say this correctly because I won't want this to be fed, is, you know, they came up with radical ideas which were later used in Supreme Courts to overturn and change law in the betterment of women's life. So one of which was actually used by Ruth Bader Ginsburg for the first Supreme Court case for gender equality. Now, this person, that was Polly Murray, non-binary individual. If they would be still alive today, they would probably be either non-binary or trans men, and I'm assuming their pronouns would be either they or she or he or indifferent. But for me also, when it comes to African history, I mean, the Homi tribes, that was when I heard about the warriors. Of course, that's related to Black Panther. So if you have, of course, the tribe, the women's tribe, fighters in Black Panther, that is a direct link to the Dahomey tribe. That was started in 1600 and went all the way near into 1900s. And these were, I think they are called the Amazon she warriors, but I do not think that is the correct pronouns. So that would be the Amazon they warriors if we're going to use inclusive language. But they were actually, you know, they were called the Amazons, who were not supposed to marry. And they actually, by their own statements, changed their sex, right? So they said that they were men, not women. And there were also, you know, there was a combination of both men and women in the army. So it was a part of the army. And when I heard about them, read about them, and then saw them being displayed in Black Panther, as in the movie, my mind was blown. Unfortunately, it is still very heteronormative in the film, but we are seeing part of this power that, you know, and I hope that more people are going to be talking about specifically about African warriors and she warriors. But those are the two people and, you know, the army that I definitely get a lot of inspiration from.
If I may come in here, I kind of think, to start this off, I would say homosexuality is African, and what is un-African is homophobia. Yeah, because when we look at the history of Africa, we would know that we've always been expressing ourselves in the ways that we thought we could do without anybody criminalizing us. I'll talk about my place called Yoruba in Nigeria, where I come from. There's this particular deity that is called Yemoja. It's actually the female one, but we also have others that are men, like the Obatala, Shopono, Songo. These are the names of the deities in my place. But the thing is, whoever is a custodian of any of these deities is usually referred to as a wife of that deity, whether it's a man or a woman. So that tells you where it comes from. For instance, when we talk about Yemoja and Oshun, these are all female deities, and females are the custodians. So when they're being called wives of Yemoja or wives of Oshun, so that tells you the relationship around us expressing ourselves, the way that we feel we can express ourselves, because usually they're not married to men. They are married to the deities. And you would see them wear skirts, the men, especially for the Shopono and Songo, the men would wear skirts, they would wear blouses, they would tie wrappers, they would braid their hairs and put some cowries to decorate it like women. So it tells us that we've always had trans people, we've always had people who love the same or have affection for the same sex back in Africa before what I'll call the 3 C's and the 1 P came in. And the 3 C's are colonization, Christianity, civilization, and then politics. Just like Z was saying then, some people then began to feel bad about themselves being referred to in certain ways. For instance, in Yoruba language, Nigeria, where I come from, there is something called adofuro. That literally translates to someone who has sex, who has anal sex. So if we want to look at it now, we will talk about men having sex with men. So if it was not happening, there wouldn't be a word for that. Mm-hmm. Even in the northern part of Nigeria, they have a word called liwat, which means that men that have anal intercourse. And they also have another word for men who are quite who are effeminate in nature. They call them yandaudu. So which means these things have always been in existence before colonization came. And when colonization came, if we didn't have them, they would not bring about all these laws that criminalize us. Because there's no way you can promulgate a law when nothing has happened. So they met us the way that we were. And then Christianity was part of what they brought. Civilization, which brings about being shamed, and we wanting to be like our colonial masters. So we began to forget about our own culture, and that seeped into the society. And then all of the persecution and discrimination just came up. And the P one is the politics, because our leaders now, even when colonization is gone, or some of us will got independence, they don't want to repeal all these laws because it helps them to scapegoat certain people for their own inadequacy of how they manage the economy or the countries where they govern. So the icons that I kind of look up to is, one of them is Yemoja, and the other one is /hm, because they're all females. I would call them lesbians. So if anybody wants to read about them, it's out there, Yemoja and /hm. Very, very kind-hearted. In fact, they were seen as women that bring about wealth and bring about children to the community. That's the way that they see them, and they still, up till now, go to do all of the rituals that they have to do every year. They perform all of this. So please take your time to read about Yemoja and /hm, if you can.
Thank you for that. I'd never actually, I don't think I'd stopped to look at that language and history connection of, this is an indication of what has been, that was really interesting. Sethu, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on this.
Yes, yes, Faith. I think I want to add. I'm in full. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm in full agreement with Z and Aderonke. But I do want to add on this question of thinking about icons or figures. One of the things about history is that it is never complete. And to be honest, I don't think that there is really a queer African history. There are figures that we can tap into who actually did not make it into African history. But because we see them as queer, we put them there. And that's why I liked what Aderonke was saying, to think of deities as part of that, of that spectrum of expanding African history to make it queer. And I think the title of this webinar is also about queering African history. So for me, the interest then would be because history is not complete and because history has so many gaps, particularly when it comes to queerness, queer figures, whether they are homosexual or queer in its broad sense, as I was saying earlier. I think what for me would be interesting is to do the work that Aderonke is saying, where we actually look at figures who, that aren't necessarily queer, but queer them, read them queerly, and allow them to speak to us in ways that make us feel better about ourselves as Africans, because we've been denied for so long. So in my context, for example, we have what we call Isangoma, who is a traditional healer. And many traditional healers, the practice itself or the institution of traditional healing allows for queerness. It is so open, and you embody different genders, you embody different sexualities. And so, if you go into the realm of traditional healing and become a Sangoma, and historically we've had these figures, but we didn't read them as queer. They come into African history as just, spiritual figures. But now what we can do is to say, in creating African history or queering African history, then we are rereading these figures. So there's one figure that I'm interested in South Africa. And it's a very funny story, actually, of a woman by the name of Nongqawuse. And Nongqawuse was born in 1841 in the part of the world in part of the country where I come from, the Eastern Cape. And her story is so interesting because all she's known for is that she had a prophecy, and it was the prophecy from her ancestors, or what is believed that it was a prophecy from her ancestors. And some people made it to seem as if the prophecy came from white people because because the colonizers were there, and she appears in the archive as early as 15 years old. She's 15, she's 16, she has this prophecy, and she goes and tells a king about this prophecy, and the king, they kind of believe her, and they destroy everything. And in my head, I'm like, that is actually so queer. Like, to have so much power as a 15-year-old, you could have been, smoking weed, and people believe you, and they change the course of history because of you. And what is that? So for me, that is interesting, is to think about characters or figures that actually just aren't regarded as anything, but see how we can queer them.
Thank you for that. That is something I will definitely be practicing going forward. I think that is something I haven't thought about, and an interesting way to look at history and look at what is already there, kind of like you said, as Adironke has done with the deities. And I guess I want to now know a bit more about, I know that you've just said that you don't believe in a queer African history, but African history and maybe where queerness appears, how has that impacted each of your works? So anyone, please feel free to.
Well, for me, because of, I would say because we've not been documenting our history. And if anybody is telling your history for you, it can never be complete. And me being able to look inwards and look at what's been quite historical prior to colonization, that's kind of impacted how I see queerness, because we support people who are seeking asylum and identify as LGBTIQ in the UK. And when people go to seek asylum, there's always been this understanding in the establishment that you cannot be a gay person in Africa. It's not a thing that happens in Africa, so to say. But because of my understanding of the history and culture of Africa, I know that it is possible. It does exist. So there's no way you can say we cannot have lesbian or gay or a trans person from Africa. That's not possible. So it is my understanding of that that's actually emboldened me to say, whoever identifies as an LGBTIQ person and is seeking asylum in the UK and who approaches African Rainbow Family, I would stand by the person to ensure that they can have a successful journey through the asylum system. And that's not just it. Also to campaign to change the system so that they begin to realize that, yes, this is who we have always been back in our countries. So it's not like the myth that our leaders are trying to sell to us back home, that it is a thing of the West. Because when they want to criminalize us, that's what they say. And then when people run down to the West for protection, the West will say, there's no way you can be a gay person or a lesbian or a queer person from Africa. So you can see that we're kind of in between. But because of my understanding, I know that we are who we say we are. And that's given me that spur to continue to do what I do and campaign for a fairer system for LGBTIQ people seeking asylum.
Thank you. CEO Ozethu, I don't know what you also have to say to this question of how has your work been impacted?
Personally, I am part of creating an archive of our story and our stories. And I do that through the work I do at Gala, which is the Queer Archive, but also the work I do academically. So I wouldn't say queer African history has impacted my work. I think I would say I impact queer African history by telling our stories and writing about them and documenting them.
Wow, that is, yeah, powerful.
Yeah, I think it reminds me when Adironke said, it reminds me of a quote, when other people tell your stories, and it's like, until the lions have their own historians, the history I'll say that again. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. That is literally what it feels like. And that is sort of, you know, and I think I came across this quote a long time ago. And I think, you know, for me specifically coming from, you know, living in the diaspora, that connect, you know, the disconnect, for me, it felt like I needed, you know, for me, I had to dive into history in order to know. Intrinsically, I knew that there was nothing wrong with me, but the world is telling me that I'm wrong. But I was like, but I know myself. I know myself. How can I be wrong if I know myself, right? And I think because, you know, and there's something that happens when you are removed and, you know, your family is surviving every day and trying to have these two children being brought up in a very white, Western, heteronormative world. I had to figure out my way through whiteness, but I also had to figure out my way through Black heteronormative ideologies that has been set by the white standard, right? And I think for me, I think the feeling of knowing that there was nothing wrong with me. And I feel that that is very much a guidance from my ancestors, knowing that that was, you know, there was something, right? And there was something. And for me, I cannot, I will dive into history and I will look at it every day until I find something. And I think, you know, I think for me, I have an archive as well. I have an archive online. I started this blog. It was a blog / archive that I started for a long time, but I posted it online. It's called Kingsland. I'll put it in the chat, where I started to document mainly people from the diaspora. So talking about people from, you know, in America, you know, Europe, et cetera, because I do think that that is also important to talk about when we're talking about people from the diaspora. And I think through the stories and because they made a lot of zines, especially in America, made a lot of zines. And through that, I slowly started to dive deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that has been really helpful in you know, me understanding more of myself. But often, unfortunately, you know, it does tie. You have to go further than what your parents, you know, brought you or, you know, raised you as. It has to go deeper than that. And at one point, you kind of feel that there is sort of this feeling of loneliness, right? There's this feeling of misunderstanding because you're dealing with so many different levels that I do not think, you know, a lot of people who are heteronormative and Black struggle with, right? Because there are so many multiple intersectionalities that is very much related to living in the diaspora. But I mean, like, everything that I've read has impacted everything that I came across, every research that I found, every video that I found. It was more of like an uncovering, knowing that I knew exactly that it was just like a testament, knowing that I was right? And that whatever I feel wasn't, at least let's just say, not wrong. That is kind of like what people want you to feel like, that you are wrong. And that is definitely not it. So every research that I found, I found more of myself. And I think the person who definitely was part of that journey was Marsha P. Johnson, an American trans woman who started Pride, who started Stonewall riots. And the more that I found out about them, the more it was clear that I wanted to dive more into the history of African, the African diaspora, the queer African diaspora. But yeah, like Zetu said, you know, I am also, you know, I'm creating this archive. I am talking to people. I'm always, you know, carving until I find the answers that I know exist, because that is where the truth lies.
Thank you. That is, yeah. I can see you've like really been on this journey, and and it's beautiful to hear. And I feel like the theme, obviously, of the evening being LGBT history, but history generally, like, seems to be just recurring. And I wonder, like, how can history inform our understanding of gender and of sexuality today? But specifically, like, within international development, how do you see history playing a role in our understanding, if at all?
Yeah, I would say, from what I said before and from the exact quote that Z made about the lion and the hunter, I think our people need to begin to study history. It might not be taught in school because we're talking about international or the diaspora here. So they might not be taught in schools. Or where possible, maybe parents or even individuals who are adults can just research. We now live in a world where we have access to God knows how many resources out there that we want to learn about. It is very, very important for people to know their history. Because when you do not know your history, somebody else will tell your story for you. And they will embellish it, they will take out of it to suit their own agenda. So my recommendation there is that people should, it doesn't have to be a thing that you do, like every day you have to read about history. That's not what I'm saying. But people should take time out to read about their own history. It doesn't have to be the whole of African history. Even if it's just your own tribe, where you come from. And from there, you would have better understanding of other people's history. And then you would know that what they are selling to us as being alien to us is not. If you remember, sometime in 2016 or 15, I think it was, when Theresa May was still the Prime Minister, she did apologize for the role that the UK played in importing homophobia to our countries. Because African Rainbow Family and so many other organizations, we did campaign that year for the apology to come. That was during Shogun. And it did happen, and I was impressed, but that's not all that we want. It's because we were able to let them know that we talk about the history. Because if we did not talk about the history, they would not accept that they imported it to us. So this is why it's important for people to learn about who they are, their culture. That doesn't mean that you cannot still practice other cultures where you live, but at least you will have a knowledge of who you are and where you come from.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely, it is imperative to know history and to be able to use that as the proof, as the case, you know, to combat these ideas that you know, homosexuality or queerness isn't African. It's imperative to have that knowledge of history. And just specifically as well, just to, anyone could feel free to jump in again, but as well to Sethu and Z, specifically for those maybe who aren't African themselves, but have a desire to better understand gender or sexuality, and specifically within that international development field, how do you think history can play a role in helping people achieve this?
My take here is, for instance, what we're doing today. There might be, I don't want to think everybody who is attending is from Africa. Or if they are, maybe they live in the diaspora. So events like this is very important for us to hold once in a while, and where possible, regularly, just to kind of encourage ourselves and update ourselves on. And another thing is I don't want to promote any book because I don't know them. I don't even know the author. So I came across one that I read, and it was all about my tribe, the Yoruba tribe. And I think it was quite rich when I read it. I don't know who the author is. I've never met him or her. But I could post it here if people want to. If it's online, they can find it.
Please do, please do.
So I'll just put it in the chat. It's quite rich, I think. It's by this author. It's called Same-Sex Relationships in Yoruba Culture and Orature, and it's written by one Judge Olushola Ajibade. So if people look at it up, they will see. And there are so many other resources out there, even the ones that I have not even discovered myself, which other people can recommend to us. And what Zetu is doing, I think it's good, which is archiving. Because there will be a time that we probably would not be around again. Then people can look back into all of those.
Mm.
And the work of Z is equally important. Once we begin to document things, we cannot all become we cannot be documenting things. It's not all of us that will go into history or writing books. But for those who can do it, I would kind of encourage them to continue. Dig deeper, write them down, and then for future generations to read. I said it before, I don't want to say because of no civilization. We were never taught from the beginning to write history. Our history, usually we say it when we all sit down near the fire. Back in the villages, we just tell history. Nobody writes it down. And you can't blame them. That's the way that our culture has always been. So I think that is why we have more problems. But for people now that are more educated, who understand the significance of history and documentation, I think some people are doing quite well what they are doing. And we continue to talk about it and debate about it. I think that's one of the ways forward.
Okay, we've got another 2 minutes on this question. So, seeing Zetha, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Okay, I'll add something. And I think Aderoka did allude to this. So I think what is important is that we need to remember that history is not only about the past. History is actually in the present. It is a record of that moment. That we are reading a moment from 1851 or 1937 is just our access. But this moment that we are living in is also history. And so and maybe I'll be a little bit controversial now. So there are a few countries in the continent in Africa that have repealed these laws against homosexuality. They've decriminalized and they've repealed laws, particularly the ones who were colonized by the Portuguese. And if you look at the archives, right, prior to this moment of decriminalization and repealing of the laws, that record is very different from how people are experiencing their lives now. And so that history it's not necessarily wrong. It's history that was happening at that moment, but it is not a history that tells the continuation of the story. And so this moment of what is happening in Mozambique, what is happening in Cape Verde, what is happening in so many different places, Sao Tome and Principe, it is such a rich moment that not only just needs to be documented, it needs to speak back to what was erased. So as we are writing this history now, we have to go back and say, well, perhaps we have to show the gaps. We have to show the gaps in that history, because the unfortunate thing, when we are taught history in Africa, when we are taught history from still written by the colonizers. We're not going to be taught the history of today. and for me, it's important that we ensure that this history that we are living in now continues constantly to speak back to that dominant history, which actually erased and did so much violence to African societies.
Thank you. Yes, this concept of history being today, yes, that is something that my brain was just like, this is so true. And even your description of this dominant history versus, you know, the things that continue even whilst others have been documented is so important. And I guess for my final question this evening, how can people, wherever they are, whether this is within Africa or within the diaspora, or just people anywhere, how can people support LGBTQ+ rights within Africa in a manner which is both safe for them, wherever they are, and other people as well that they may be working with?
From my experience, I think that it is better to work with the people who are on the ground. Because African Rainbow Family, we are a part of so many civil society organizations. There's one called the UKH, that's Alliance for Global Equality. And when we hear of anything happening in different countries, what we do first, which is what I would prescribe here, is if we have contacts in those African countries, we should contact them and ask them how do they want us to support them. Because that's part of what we do in African Rainbow Family. We put the people in the center. They tell us how they want us to support them. And the reason why I'm saying this is this. I've used this several times to give an example. If I tell you that I have slight headache, you don't know what the cause is. But because you feel so much for me and you want me to be relieved, you could give me paracetamol. And I could use it and it might not work. But I would be expecting you to say to me, have you had this headache before? If you did, what did you use? Let me get you that thing. So your paracetamol really might not work for me. It's not because you hate me. You actually want me to be relieved. But what you're giving me is not right for my problem. So that's the aspect that I'm coming from. That the best to do is to contact people on the ground, especially in African countries. We all know that we are free here. Then when we start campaigning on their behalf, we are putting them in jeopardy without working with them to say, how can we do it? What kind of support can we give you? How would you do it safely by yourself? Or how can we support you from behind? Or do you want us to go public? They will tell us. And then we can act at that point. Not us just taking it upon ourselves because we feel for our LGBTIQ siblings wherever they are, and then we go campaigning. It might not really work for them. In fact, it might have a negative effect on what we're trying to change.
Thank you for that. I don't know if there's anything else to add. I'm mindful of the time. I want us to be able to open up for audience questions, but I feel like that is a fantastic note to end this segment on, just asking people, just centering people. I think I couldn't agree more. It is so, so important. And that analogy you used was just spot on, in that sometimes you do want to help and you might do something that might help, but you know, just talking, just finding out first. So thank you to all our panelists for this discussion. We are now going to move on to the Q&A segment. So I'm just going to open the Q&A up, and I'm just going to try and go from the earliest question and move through them. So we have one question here, which says, do you believe that there is a connection with the loss of African spiritual practices and the erasure of queerness in our cultures? Do you think that reviving African spiritual knowledge or reverence may be a necessary step for queer liberation in Africa? I don't know if Aderonke, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you did mention some deities.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say, that I've spoken about that before, because when you look at all this, the Oshun, for instance, is the goddess that brings about, that gives children. I'm not saying that God was not. I'm a Christian. But that does not mean that we should erase all of those that have been happening before Christianity came on to Africa. The person that asked that question, I think, must probably be thinking that there should be a connection between what the spiritual guidance were in that time and now, talking about who we are. But because we've erased it, if you remember, I said the 3C. So talking about civilization, that's why we left all of them. And then we go towards the Bible. Please do not misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with the Bible. I am a Christian. I use the Bible. But at the same time, that does not make me forget about what was before the Bible. And when I say to understand or to know about what was before the Bible, is to enlarge my understanding, my horizon about life and how to approach life. So I would say to this person that asked this question that I think it's a good way for us to go.
Thank you. Thank you to that person for that question, and thank you, Aderonke, for that succinct answer. We won't have time to go through all of them, but I did just want to say to one of the attendees who asked regarding East African history, I believe Z put something in the chat, so please feel free to.
Yeah, I think I put it in the wrong one. Let me just try this again.
Okay. And just, I think we have time for maybe just one last question, which I think is a great note to end on. Is there a good resource for queer and homosexual histories, either by country or generally? This is from one of our attendees. So I don't know if each of you maybe can say just one resource that you think is necessary for people to know about.
I mean, there are many, and I put it in the chat. So on the website, kingsland.com. So I archived African history, what I found so far, but there's a lot more. And also in the Amara Wilhelm Wicks site, they talk about African history, but also just all gender and sex across the world. And I think there is another one, I'll just put it in the chat as well. What I found so far, this is again like an ongoing message, but I think it is very, very helpful for people who are on their journey. And I will always be, I'll try to keep it as up and updated as much as I can. But I put another one in the chat as well for people who want to learn more about that and are on their journey as well of understanding not only African history, but also the African history on the diaspora, right? So just thinking broadly as well, because of the result of colonization.
I'm not very sure. The research that I posted, I don't know if it's just for us or if the people attending can have access to that. But if you read that book, there's a lot of other references used there that you can then follow the lead, because it's spoken about different cultures, not just Yoruba own. So they can then follow the resources, the references to learn more from other authors. I don't know where I don't know if they have access to where I've posted it to. Do you think so, Faith?
I have just put it in the main chat for everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. And Zethi, is there any last?
I would recommend books if you do have access to getting these books. So there's one that it's called The Handbook on Queer African Studies, and it's edited by SSAP, who's from Cameroon. And it's actually a really great resource, because it's not just academic work, but there's a lot of like different kind of scholars who are, artists and activists, etc., who've contributed to this book. The other one is The African Sexualities Reader, edited by Sylvia Tamale. They're both huge books, but I mean, between those two and the Queer African Reader. So there's the Queer African Studies by SSAP. There's the African Sexualities Reader by Sylvia Tamale. And then there's the Queer African Reader by Akima Abbas and I forgot her name now. Sorry. So those three, and they look, and between the three of them, you actually get a full sense of what's happening in the continent. So I would recommend those three. And if you are into, if you like more literary stuff, and there's again the titles are very similar. So Queer Africa 1 and Queer Africa 2, edited by Karen Martin and Makosa Zanakaba. And these literary texts are actually products of the archive that I'm part of. So yeah, I would recommend those 5 texts actually.
Thank you so much. Please, Zethi, if you could maybe just put your information at the books that you've just mentioned. I tried to type them into the chat quickly. I think I missed one. But thank you so much to everyone who has joined us this evening. Thank you for taking the time out. I hope this has been an informative panel. And thank you for those of you that submitted questions. We really appreciate all of you. Panelists, thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge. We at Hub Cymru Africa, SSAP, and I'm sure on behalf of all the attendees, really appreciate this. So thank you very much.